What's up? This is Eric Todd, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to create a sports or esports style logo. For this project, we're going to start with Photoshop. This is where you're going to create your sketch to avoid any hand sketching. You want to create a new document of any decent size, really, and open up some source images for the mascot you're going to create. I have 3 examples here with different poses to pick from. Put the pose you want your logo to have on your newly created document and change the opacity. I like 50%, but it's completely up to you. Then lock this layer. You won't need to change it again. Next, create a new layer on top and hit B to equip your brush tool. Make sure your brush is a circle with hard edges and size it to around the thickness you want the outline of your logo to be. You'll be able to change the thickness on the actual logo later. This is just an approximation. Next, outline the general shape of the photo, following all the important lines that will need to be created on the logo. You can do more detailed lines depending on your mascot, but the jaguar I chose will need to be simple in order to add the spots later. You can play around with how the sketch looks, where to cut off the logo, and stuff like that in this stage, but also later. Next, I went through and made each line intersection rounded off like this. This is a super important detail in creating sports or esports logos. When you're satisfied with your outline, save it as a PNG or JPEG and we'll move over to Illustrator. In Illustrator, create a new file and add your sketch into the file. Again, change the opacity and lock the layer so you don't accidentally click on it. Start to trace the outer line of your sketch with the pen tool, and don't worry about being exact. You can make changes to corners or edges as you see fit. Since your sketch was done freehand with the brush tool, it's likely not perfect. Once you finish that, there are 2 ways to proceed. One way is the lazy, quicker way, which is just to go to Object, Path, Offset Path, and create a thick border around your shape. But I find that never looks as good as tracing the inner line of your sketch. So now you can choose which option you want, but I highly suggest tracing the inner line. Having variation in the thickness of this outline gives the logo character, so you may want to play with making it even more dramatic than I do. You can also change this outline shape all the way through the entire process of making the logo, so don't stress too much about it. Once you finish that and change the color, you should start to see the resemblance of your sports logo. Next, we'll start to create the other elements that need to intervene with the outline, such as the mouth and nose, and also the elements that just go on top like ears and eyes. I always do this on a new layer and lock the layer with the 2 outline tracings to avoid changing them. Again, it's hard to get these things perfect without seeing the rest of the logo finished, so don't worry about it too much as you'll probably adjust it more later. I always take a long time to figure out how to create the eye for my sports logos, so I usually just make a temporary one at this stage. When you finish those elements, move them to the original outline layer. You can do that by selecting them and dragging the little square on the right side of the layer down to the layer you want them to be on. Then, use the Shape Builder tool by copying the inner sketch and pasting it in place to cut everything out to fit inside the inner outline. I only had to do this on the nose, but you may have other things to do it with. You can see I'm still messing around with the eye here, so don't be afraid to adjust things as you go. The next step is to color your logo. I'm going to use the eyedropper tool on another source image I had that I thought had super interesting colors. You want to make sure that you have a few breaks in color, whether it be from shadows and highlights I show you later or natural color changes like this jaguar has going from dark orange to white. In order to get these colorings, I draw a new shape and use the Shape Builder tool to cut out the outline like we did earlier with the nose. It took me a while to get the coloring right, and I realized and fixed my mistake later on in the process. Next, I drew the spots from this other source image to use on my logo, but I'll spare you from watching me do that. It was during the spot tracing process that I realized the white should go all the way down the entire bottom of the jaguar, not just around the mouth. Once I had a decent number of spots, I copied them onto my logo in different ways, varying size and shape. I tried to make sure they would still be comprehensible at small sizes and not completely block the logo. Once finished with these spots, I grouped them all together and played with different colors and opacities to make sure they weren't too dominant in the logo. After I was happy with the spots, I started to work on the shading. Shading is super important in sports logos. It really gives them something to stand out from a typical flat logo. Shading follows natural lines in the animal, so since I traced a point at the jawline and behind the ear, I put a shadow there to show separation and depth of the neck to the head. I also will usually put a highlight on top of the logo and a shadow along the bottom, but that depends on what your mascot and their pose is. To create these highlights and shadows, I just used a black or white filled shape and lowered the opacity, but if your logo will need to be printed, you may have to use the shape builder tool with these highlights and shadows, and adjust the brightness levels of each individual shape in the shadow or highlight line. Feel free to play around with highlights and shadows in different places. Just make sure you trim the excess off with the shape builder tool when you're happy with them. The last thing I always do when creating this style of logo is add a colored outline to the black outline. This is a stylistic preference that isn't required, but I really like how it makes the logo stand out on a black or white background. To do this, I use the offset path tool that I used to show you the lazy way earlier in the video. Once you finish that, you've completed your logo. Like I've said, you can always adjust anything, even when you finish the logo creation. Hopefully, this helped you create a sports or esports style logo, and if you enjoyed, please like the video and subscribe, as I'll be creating more design content in the future. Thanks for watching.